Hi guys! In this video, we'll be discussing the anatomy of the heart. We're going to begin with the location of the heart. The heart is located between the pleural cavities in the middle mediastinum. The superior part of the heart is called the base and is located behind the sternum at the level of the third costal cartilage. The inferior part of the heart is called the apex and is located in the fifth intercostal space. The heart is enclosed in a tough fibrous sac called the pericardium. The pericardium enclosing the heart is made up of two layers. The tough outer layer is called the fibrous pericardium and the inner layer is called the serous pericardium. The serous pericardium has a parietal layer which lines the inner surface of the fibrous pericardium and a visceral layer which reflects onto the heart itself. Between the visceral and parietal layers, there is pericardial fluid for lubrication of the pericardium and to reduce the friction created by the beating heart. The overall function of the pericardial sac is to stabilize the heart.
Looking at the walls of the heart, there are three layers: the endocardium, the myocardium, and the epicardium. The outer layer is called the epicardium and includes the visceral layer of the pericardium, which is composed of mesothelium, followed by a layer of connective tissue. The middle layer is called the myocardium. This forms the muscular part of the heart wall and is composed of concentric cardiac muscle. The inner layer of the heart is called the endocardium and lines the inner surface of the heart, including the valves. It is composed of simple squamous cells.
Within the heart, there are four chambers. There are two atria located superiorly and two ventricles located inferiorly. The two atria are separated by an interatrial septum, and the two ventricles are separated by an interventricular septum. We'll now discuss each of the chambers individually, starting with the right atrium. The right atrium receives deoxygenated blood via the superior and inferior vena cava. The superior vena cava drains the head, neck, upper limbs, and chest. The inferior vena cava drains the trunk, viscera, and lower limbs. The right atrium also receives blood from the coronary sinus, which drains the deoxygenated blood from the cardiac veins, which will be discussed later. The foramen ovale is an opening in the interatrial septum that connects the two atria before birth. After birth, it closes and forms the fossa ovalis, which can be seen as a depression in the interatrial septum after birth. Failure of the foramen ovale to close results in a patent foramen ovale. The right atrium also contains an auricle, which is a pouch-like appendage. The pectinate muscles are ridges of myocardium found inside the auricle. The crista terminalis are ridges which runs from the superior vena cava opening to the inferior vena cava opening, with its superior extent marking the site of the SA node. This will all be discussed in the conduction system of the heart. The right atrium empties into the right ventricle through the tricuspid valve, which prevents backflow into the atria when the ventricles contract. Within the right ventricle, the chordae tendineae are fibrous cords that connect the valve leaflets to the papillary muscles. The right ventricle empties its blood through the pulmonary valve and into the pulmonary trunk, which transports blood to the lungs for reoxygenation. Now let's look at the left atrium. The left atrium receives oxygenated blood from the lungs via the pulmonary veins. It also has an auricle with pectinate muscles on the inner surface. It does not contain a crista terminalis. The left atrium empties into the left ventricle through the mitral valve, which also prevents backflow into the atrium during ventricular contraction. The mitral valve leaflets attach to the anterior and posterior papillary muscles via the chordae tendineae. The left ventricle empties its blood through the aortic valve and into the aorta, which transports the oxygenated blood to all parts of the body. We are now going to discuss the blood supply and drainage of the heart. The heart receives oxygenated blood from the coronary arteries. These arteries arise from the base of the aorta. Elastic rebound forces blood through these arteries during ventricular contraction, allowing them to fall during diastole. Your coronary arteries consist of your right and left coronary arteries. Your right coronary artery branches to form the marginal and posterior interventricular arteries, which supply the right atrium, portions of both ventricles, and the cells of the SA and AV nodes. Your left coronary artery branches to form the circumflex and anterior interventricular arteries, which supply the left atrium, the left ventricle, and the interventricular septum. We'll now look at the venous drainage of the heart. The cardiac veins are responsible for draining the deoxygenated blood of the heart and consists of your great, middle, and small cardiac veins. The great cardiac vein drains the anterior interventricular artery, and the middle cardiac vein drains the posterior interventricular artery. The small cardiac vein drains an area of the right atrium and right ventricle. All three of these cardiac veins empty its deoxygenated blood into the coronary sinus. We are now going to discuss the heart's role in circulating blood around the body. The heart is responsible for blood circulation around the entire body. It connects the systemic circuit with the pulmonary circuit. We'll start with the pulmonary circuit. Deoxygenated blood leaves the right ventricle, enters the pulmonary trunk, and is pumped to the lungs for reoxygenation. The oxygenated blood leaves the lungs via your right and left pulmonary veins and enters the heart at the left atrium. The oxygenated blood flows into the left ventricle, is pumped into the aorta, and then enters the systemic circulation from there. We'll now look at the systemic circuit. The aorta is responsible for pumping oxygenated blood to all parts of the body. The superior and inferior vena cava is responsible for draining the deoxygenated blood and returning it to the right atrium of the heart. The atrioventricular valves and semilunar valves play an important role during blood circulation. The atrioventricular valves are your tricuspid and mitral valves, and your semilunar valves are your pulmonary and aortic valves. So during diastole, the atria contracts and empties. The atrioventricular valves are open, the chordae tendineae are loose, the papillary muscles are relaxed. The ventricles then relaxes and fills with blood. The pulmonary and aortic valves are closed. Whereas during systole, the atrioventricular valves are closed, the chordae tendineae are tense, the papillary muscles are contracted. The ventricles contract and empties, and your pulmonary and aortic valves are opened.
Thanks for watching. That brings us to the end of the anatomy of the human heart. Please make sure that you do the quiz. The link is in the description below.